The first turbojet engine that could have changed the air war over Germany ran on a test stand in Dessau in October 1940, and then sat, starved of steel, for nearly 3 years. It was the Jumo 004A, built under Anselm Franz at Junkers Motor and Worker, and by the time it turned over for the first time, the Luftwaffe was already fighting a war it had planned to win without it. For decades afterward, the story was told as a tale of Hitler's interference, of a miracle aircraft delayed by a madman's whim. The truth is duller and heavier. The engine was never given the metal. Franz's problem was not aerodynamic. It was geological. A gas turbine wants nickel, cobalt, and molybdenum in its hot section, and Germany had almost none of any of them to spare. So the production 004B was redesigned around what the Reich actually possessed: mild sheet steel, aluminium coatings, hollow turbine blades cooled by air bled through their own interiors. It was an extraordinary piece of engineering under constraint, and it produced an engine with a nominal service life of 25 hours that in practice ran 10 or 12. Engines, not airframes, would govern how many jets could fly on any given morning. That arithmetic never changed in any timeline. Meanwhile, the priority lists went to the Bf-109, the Fw-190, the bomber programs. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. Because in the spring of 1943, one man was in a position to move the turbine to the front of the queue. And what no one in Dessau understood yet was that the decision, when it came, would arrive too late to matter for the reason everyone assumed. On 22nd May 1943 at Lechfeld, Adolf Galland climbed out of the Me-262 V4 and said it was as though angels were pushing. The General der Jagdflieger was not a man given to lyricism about equipment. The airframe had first flown on jet power alone on 18 July 1942 at Leipheim, with Fritz Wendel at the controls, and had been treated since as a promising experiment. Galland came down from that flight convinced it was something else entirely, the only answer to a daylight bombing campaign that German fighters could no longer reach without being shot to pieces by escorts. 3 days later, on 25 May 1943, Erhard Milch convened an emergency priority board. Historically, no such board existed until 1 March 1944, when the Jägerstab was created under Karl Otto Sauer, with Milch and Speer, in panicked response to the American raids of that February. Here it comes 9 months early, and Milch, General Feldmarschall, State Secretary of the Reich Air Ministry, General Luftzeugmeister, the man who owned aircraft procurement, uses it to do one thing. Machine tools and materials for the Jumo 04 go to the head of the queue, ahead of bomber engines, ahead of the Me-209. He does not promise a war winner. He promises an interceptor the escorts cannot catch, and he stakes his position on it. The board's decision does not create alloys that do not exist. It creates schedule. Jigs are cut, cutting tools allocated, Dessau's line laid out for volume rather than development. France gets the tungsten carbide for his machine tools 11 months before he historically would. That single displacement in time is the whole divergence, and everything that follows runs downstream of it. At Insterburg in East Prussia, on 26 November 1943, Hitler looked at the Me-262 and asked Willy Messerschmitt whether it could carry bombs. Messerschmitt, historically, said it could carry two 250-kilogram bombs. That answer traveled through Göring and became the Blitzbomber order of May 1944, and it cost Milch his authority over air armament that summer. In this timeline, Milch and Galland answer first. They describe an aircraft built for one job and badly suited to any other. The fuel fraction that gives it barely an hour aloft. The wing loading that makes it unforgiving low and slow. The gun sight and the 430mm Mk108 cannon set up for a fast-closing pass at a bomber box. They tell him that a jet carrying bombs is a jet that cannot climb to the formations, and that the formations are the problem. Göring, who's standing with Hitler, has already collapsed. Brokers rather than decides. He does not defend the bomber idea because he has nothing left to spend defending it. The fighter designation survives the afternoon. It is a small thing, an argument won in a cold hangar in front of a display of new equipment, but it means that when the first squadrons form, They form as interceptors, with pilots trained to attack bombers, and not as a fighter-bomber force learning to hit tactical targets. They will never usefully strike. The consequences of that survive into the following spring. So do the reasons it will not be enough. By late May 1944, JG-7 has roughly 200 Me-262s on strength. Historically, the type first fought on 25 July 1944. Commando Novotny formed that autumn, and fewer than 300 of the 1,400-odd built were ever in combat units at one time. Here the wing exists 8 months early, and it is doing precisely what Galland said it would. Serviceability hovers near half. That is not pessimism, it is the 25-hour engine meeting reality and mechanics pulling Jumos after 10 or 12 hours of running. On a good morning, JG-7 puts up perhaps 90 aircraft. 90 is enough. The Me-262A Mine 1A runs at about 870 kilometers an hour, roughly 190 faster than a P-51B, and the escorts released by Doolittle in January to hunt German fighters cannot hunt something that simply leaves. Massed passes come through the bomber boxes from astern and above, 4 Mk-108 shells sufficient to break a B-17 apart, and then the jets are gone before the Mustangs can convert altitude into a firing solution. 8th Air Force losses on the deepest missions pass 10%. Not once. Repeatedly. Karl Spaatz took command of United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe on the 1st of January 1944. By the last week of May, he is holding the same paper Ira Eaker held after the second Schweinfurt raid of the 14th October 1943, when 60 of 291 bombers did not come home and unescorted deep penetration was suspended until long-range escort arrived. Escort has arrived. The 354th flew the first P-51B mission on the 1st of December 1943. Mustangs went to Berlin on 4th March 1944. The escort is no longer the answer. Spaatz does not suspend the offensive, he shortens it. Two things make his arithmetic different from Eaker's. Eisenhower ruled for Tedder's transportation plan on 25th of March but permitted attacks on oil, and the synthetic fuel campaign opened on 12th May against Zwickau, Berlin, Merseburg, Lohne and Brix. It is 18 days old and already working. And the invasion is weeks away. So Spaatz concentrates the hydrogenation plants and the jet fields at Lechfeld, Rhein and Parchim. Fewer targets, shorter routes, heavier escort over fewer miles. He accepts a loss rate he does not describe as sustainable in any document that will survive, because the alternative is to stop, and stopping in the last fortnight of May 1944 is not something he is willing to hand to Tedder as a reason to take his bombers away. Allied air supremacy over the beachhead holds on 6th of June 1944. It holds for reasons that have nothing to do with the jets being absent. They are not absent, they are in the wrong place, doing the thing they were built to do. JG-7's Me-262s are based to defend the Reich, the refineries, the cities, the bomber approach corridors, and Normandy is not where the strategic bombers are. Luftwaffe 3 under Sperl has a few hundred serviceable aircraft in the west against some 11,000 Allied machines, and the only German fighters over the invasion beaches that morning are still the two FW-190s flown by Josef Priller and Heinz Wodarczyk. When jets are pushed west, the geometry defeats them. An hour of endurance means minutes over the coast. The forward fields they would need are cratered by an interdiction campaign that has been running for months and does not care what type of aircraft it is denying. And an interceptor optimized to overtake a bomber at 8,000 meters is a poor instrument against typhoons and thunderbolts in a crowded low-altitude brawl, where the Mk-108's short effective range demands a steady pass no pilot gets. The Me-262 was never a tactical aircraft. Milch and Galland said so at Insterburg to save it. That argument holds on the 6th of June. And it cuts both ways. The technological lead is real. What sits underneath it is not. Turkey halted chrome shipments to Germany on 20 of April 1944. Portugal embargoed wolfram in June. Tungsten carbide mattered as much for the machine tool cutters that made turbine blades as for anti-tank shot, which tied the raw material directly to the one thing Milch's board had actually bought: production rate. The cutters wear out. The replacements do not come. The fuel is worse. German aviation fuel output fell from roughly 156,000 tons in April 1944 to about 52,000 in June, and to near 10,000 by September. The Me-262 burned J2, a kerosene-type fuel less demanding to produce than 87-octane gasoline, and drawn from the same hydrogenation plants that Spaatz is flattening. A jet does not escape the oil campaign by being a jet. And the pilots? Training fuel was cut first, years before, and Luftwaffe pilots were reaching operational units in 1944, with roughly 110 to 150, flying hours against 300 or more for the Americans facing them. The Jumo 004 punishes a rushed throttle with a flameout or a fire, 200 airframes on strength, an engine that lasts a dozen hours, no tungsten to make more, no fuel to fly what exists, and boys at the controls with a third of the hours they need. The lead was never made of the jet. It was made of everything the jet was standing on. The Allies do not answer with technology. They answer with numbers and patience. Standing patrols orbit Lechfeld, Rhine, and Parchim, waiting for jets in the 2 vulnerable minutes of landing approach when they are slow, committed, and low on fuel. Escort ranges push deeper. Meteors work up in England. The first shooting stars arrive late and largely miss the fighting. None of it is decisive on its own. All of it together is enough, because the side with 11,000 aircraft can afford to lose the exchange every single time and still be there next week. The bill comes due unevenly. The 8th Air Force's casualty ledger for 1944 is heavier than it was in reality, by thousands of men who in our timeline came home. The oil campaign runs some weeks behind schedule, which means German fuel output collapses in the autumn rather than the late summer, which means a handful of divisions get a little more mobility than they should have. The invasion date does not move. The Eastern Front does not move. The war's ending shifts by a season at most, and possibly not at all. Milch keeps his job into 1945 and loses the argument anyway, not to Hitler, not to Goering, but to arithmetic he could not procure his way out of. That is the shape of the thing. A single decision taken 11 months early, executed competently, defended successfully against the man who historically overruled it, produced exactly what its advocates promised, an interceptor the enemy could not catch. It bought a year of technical advantage. It bought nothing that lasted, because a lead in engineering is only ever alone against the industrial base that has to service it. Germany had run out of chrome, wolfram, kerosene, and flying hours long before it ran out of good ideas. The angels were pushing. There was simply nothing left underneath them.